Good morning. Welcome to the 5th Annual Parent and Community Engagement Day for the month of April 2017. Today, we're bringing you here because there's some very important information that you need to know about that's going to be affecting not only our school district, but throughout the state of New Jersey. We're blessed to have here with us today some officials from New Jersey school boards who advocate on our behalf on the state and federal level. I'm blessed to be a part of the legislative committee and the urban boards. We're working with them not only in the state of New Jersey, but also on the national level for national school boards. So once the information came out, I tapped into them to make sure that we could get a date so they can come and give you information that you need to know, and you need to make sure your parents know. So this will be taped, and we need to turnkey it back in your schools. At this point, I'm going to bring up Ms. Betty Thomas, and I'm going to ask you to come and do the welcome. She's the Vice President of the District Parent Advisory Council. In the month of November and the month of April, we do a joint session between parental involvement and the DPAC, because that affects the Title I funding, the Title II, and the Title III. Title I is what you're here for. Title II is for professional development for our teachers in the district. Title III is for our students who are English language learners, special needs, and you will get information on that today. But that's why it is so important that not only do you get the information, but you turnkey this in the district. Ms. Betty Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Well, good morning, and I'm glad to see as many of you as we have, and I'm so glad you made the effort to get here, because when you talk about money and how our money and funding is coming, that's the most important part to all of us. If you don't know how it's done, we can't do a good job, and we need to know how much we have, where it's coming from, and how long. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. At this time, I'm going to call up Mr. Kevin Barfield, and he's going to do an introduction of our speakers today.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kevin Barfield. I'm the current Secretary of District Parent Advisory Council. And today we have two members from, as Ms. Wilson said, New Jersey school boards that will be here to do presentations on the information that you see on the agenda, the topics. First, we will have Michael Vernick. He joined the New Jersey School Board as the Director of Governmental Relations in January of 2006. Mike has been involved in state and local government since 1975. His career with the mayor's office in the city of Trenton has subsequently included 16 years in the New Jersey Office of Management and Budget, 3 years in the State Office of Information Technology, and 1 year in the New Jersey's Attorney General's Office. In addition to working previously as a lobbyist for the New Jersey School Board Association, Mike has held a similar position at the New Jersey Association of Counties. Before this most recent New Jersey School Board Association, Mike held positions as acting director, then senior deputy director at the Casino Reinvestment Development Authority in Atlantic City. He graduated from Uppsala College in East Orange with a BA in philosophy, and Mike subsequently earned his MA from Writers College Program for Administrators in 1979. And while employed by the New Jersey Department of Treasury, he also completed a certificate public management program. So today, Mr. Vernick will actually speak about Camden City's school budget. So we'd like to introduce Mr. Vernick to speak on that topic.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try and keep this simple and straightforward. It's always about money. I've spent my entire life working in some kind of financial capacity I grew up in Trenton, as the gentleman just explained, and I started my career in the mayor's office in Trenton, and then I moved in and out of state government and the School Boards Association. I spent some time in Atlantic City, and every place I've been, it's always about the money. We're going to talk today, I'm going to talk about the way the state provides resources to the city and how that impacts the city, and then Sharon's going to talk about what's happening in Washington and how that impacts some of the programs that Ms. Wilson talked about just a few minutes ago. The state has a school funding methodology called the School Funding Reform Act. It was passed in 2008, and it's pretty straightforward. It basically says that the state has come up with this number that represents what's supposed to be spent for an elementary school student, and then they add to that number a series of adjustments called weighting factors, which address the needs of individual students, if they're English language learners or special needs students, etc. So they take this base amount and they come up with, on an individual student basis, a number that represents what it costs to provide an adequate education for that student. They total the number for all the students in a district, and they come up with what's called the district's adequacy budget. Then they subtract from the district's adequacy budget the amount of money that the district is supposed to be able to raise based on the value of the assessments, the property values in their town, and the per capita income in the town. So the formula is set to work in such a way that the state provides resources to districts based on two things: what the district needs to educate all the students based on their individual characteristics and needs, and what the district is able to pay. So there's a gradation of resources. The wealthiest districts in the state get almost no money from the state. The poorest districts get a large percentage of money from the state. I think Camden gets probably, I would say, somewhere around 80% of the money that gets spent in the district for state and local resources comes from the state. The rest comes from property values and per capita incomes. That's a simple explanation of the way the formula works. It's been in place for about 9 years now. The problem is that for all of those 9 years, the state has put in language provisions in the Appropriations Act that limit the way the formula has been applied. And as a result, there's a large number of districts, and you may have heard some of this in the news or read about it in the paper here, in particularly in South Jersey. There are districts that are getting more money from the formula than they should get, and there are districts that are getting less. The result of the discussions that have been going on, Senator Sweeney, the Senate President, has been having school aid hearings around the state, and a lot more districts now are beginning to understand the details of the formula, and they're looking at what they're supposed to get based on their current population and the demographics, the needs of the individual students, and their ability to pay versus what they are getting. And there's some pretty extreme disparities. There are some districts south of here that are only getting about 40% of what the formula says the state should provide. What that means is that the tax rate in that district is a lot higher than it should be. There are other districts in close proximity that are getting 140% of what the formula says. And so their taxes are a lot lower because the state's giving them more than they need. The problem with all this is that it's caused a lot of focus on the school aid formula, and it's reopened a lot of questions that go back 30 years when the court got involved with the original Abbott cases. And there are a lot of people now in Trenton who are talking about changing the way the formula works. And in that context, and this is what's important for Camden, there's some question about whether or not Camden would lose money from the state. And my belief is that the key question is how close any town, Camden in this case, is to what's considered adequate for the student enrollment in the district. Camden is still below what the state says they should be spent for adequacy based on the characteristics of the student population. So clearly, any reduction in aid wouldn't help. It would take you further away from the goal of the new school funding law. That's a really quick overview. Anybody have any questions about that? Because there's a couple other points I want to make.
What, when you're saying in reference to the percentage of aid, and the fact that like right now with the charter schools, how does that work in reference to the state aid and based on, like you're saying, some of the funding that may be coming from taxes, residential taxes, how is that split up amongst your charter schools compared to your public schools?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's not an easy answer. And it creates a problem for a district like Camden where you have a lot of charter schools. The law that was passed almost 20 years ago now says, in fact 21 years ago, the law says that in a district like Camden, if a public school student leaves the public school and goes to a charter school, 90% of the money that supports that student has to go with that student to the charter school. Charter schools would argue that that's not really true. Only about 75% of the money goes, and it's based on the categories of aid that the state provides to local districts. I'm inclined to believe that more like 90% than the 75% goes. But what that does, and this is important, if you have a room like this, right, and we're only filling about 20% of the room, you still have to have heat, you still have to have lights, whether the whole room is filled or only a part of the room is filled. So when you have a school that has to operate and needs a certain amount of resources to operate, and you take a subset of the resources that the state and the local district provide for students and you send them somewhere else, it makes it harder for the district to operate efficiently. And I would argue that it makes it more difficult to provide that adequate education. That's what the law says. The association's position, which is based on the collective opinions of school boards across the state, is that charter schools are fine, but the state should provide a separate pot of money to run charter schools. If kids want to go to charter schools, fine. Pay for them with some different pot of money because the public schools need the money that was supposed to be allocated to cover their cost of operations. It's not that complicated. Trying to explain that to some people in Trenton is obviously a little more complicated, but I mean that's sort of where we are. So you make a good point. There are a straightforward set of assumptions about how schools are supposed to operate and how the state formula is supposed to work. But what happens is legislators, for a variety of reasons, make adjustments to those formulas, and then they expect everybody to be fine and everything to work, except that you're never really getting all the money you're supposed to get, and then they turn around and say, well, you're not providing the education you're supposed to provide. Well, if you don't have all the money, how are you supposed to do what they say you're supposed to do?
So then the other part, I guess, is the way I look at it, is that, for instance, if we're talking about it costs $24,000 or $2,200 or how much, whatever the high number they're saying is a per pupil cost for a student in Camden, we know that it doesn't take that same amount of money when those children go into a charter school because the population is smaller.
The population is smaller, their overhead isn't as big, yeah.
And then you have the situation where a lot of times they may be in a building is a public school building. So with all that being said, is that conversation being talked about to really give some more clarity, because the misconception becomes that the state is spending all this money for students to be educated and they're not being educated, and you look at the test scores and you look at this and you look at that, but all those variables, because like what you just mentioned, school operations. A charter school budget should be based on the school operation, and then the fact that you have them carrying over this excess amount of money every year, so it becomes a more for-profit
organization, and I look at it as a scam more than it is about educating our children.
I wouldn't go so far officially to say it's a scam, but I would say that you make some good points. I think that it's very difficult to compare public schools to charter schools for a whole bunch of reasons. Charter schools, whether they would agree with this or not, are somewhat more selective. Public schools have to take whoever shows up. And so they have to deal with those students, and they have to do their best to make sure that they get as good an education as everybody else does. So obviously in urban districts, you have a preponderance of disparity. You have all kinds of issues that you have to deal with in the schools. And the charter schools sort of select out from that. Typically, the thing that it's most concerning to me is that charter schools do not typically have as many kids who have special learning needs as public schools do. And the public schools have to provide accommodations, et cetera, that cost a lot of money, and the state doesn't allow any adjustments, any special adjustments to the amount of money that you're allowed to spend in your budget. So it makes things more difficult for the public schools and the charter schools. Also, and I want to come back to talk some more about the state funding issues, but this charter school issue is a big one now. The charter schools, because of the way they operate, aren't limited by some of the limits that are put on local school districts. You made a point about how much money they have left over at the end of the year that they can carry over. School districts, because of a law that was passed in 2010, have a limit on how much money. If you get $100 to spend in a year and you only spend 90, you can't take the $10 and carry it over. You have a 2% cap, and there's a limit on how much money you can carry into the next year. The rest of the money that's left has to go to reduce your tax levy. So you're kind of putting this catch-22 situation where you should spend the money in the year you have it, and if you don't get anything good out of it except a small amount that gets carried over. So there's a lot of disincentive for public schools to be as efficient as possible so that they can save money and use it to build a pot to do other things, because the state won't let you do it under the current law, with some exceptions for capital construction. Yes, sir.
When a charter school releases a child, let's say in October, they accept the child, and then they release a child, do they have to give the money back to the, or do they keep the money? Are they paid quarterly?
I mean, as far as I know,
October and January.
October and January, so it's half the year.
Like half year.
Yeah.
They pay, if the student goes in the beginning of the school year, and they keep the child until October the 15th, the child is on their roll. So the funding is included to the school that they go to. But then if they turn around and come back, then once again, we have a child who has been returned to the public school system, and the funding did not follow them because it's left in the other school that they were in.
Yeah.
And it happens again in January.
It happens again.
It can
so
happen
twice
again
a
in
year.
January.
They get funded.
Yes.
So and that's another point, and I don't want to get too far afield here, but the way the state sets up their funding mechanism is it's after the fact, and here's what I mean. In the middle of October, is it October 16th or October 15th? October 15th, the state looks at the district and figures out how many kids are in the district and what the category of students are, and they use that as a basis to calculate the district's aid for the next year. So that's a snapshot. It's a picture of one day. So in November, if you have other people who move into the district who have multiple handicaps or speak another language and require special courses to learn English, et cetera, they're not built into the next year's school aid. So you're always a year behind in terms of what you really need to cover the student population that you end the year with, as opposed to what you begin the year with. there was legislation 2 years ago that would require that every charter school proportionately would have to have the same percentage of English language learners and special needs students and at-risk students, et cetera, as the district that they were located in. The president of the Charter School Association testified that if the charter schools had to live with that requirement, they'd go out of business because they couldn't afford to operate. But the public schools do, right? And that's what we said. I mean, it's what's fair is fair. They're supposed to be alternative public schools, so why don't they have to operate with all the same rules that public schools do? The legislation went nowhere, but that's a sidebar story. The real issue with charter schools, from a positive perspective, is that when the law was passed, the idea behind charter schools is that they were supposed to be schools that had a limited number of restrictions and requirements. And the result of that would be that they would be laboratories for innovation. They would be places where they could look at alternative ways to make sure that kids were getting the education they needed to compete in the soon-to-be 21st century workplace. So the Joint Committee on the Public Schools had a hearing last summer, and Assemblywoman Sheila Oliver from East Orange, who used to be the Speaker of the General Assembly, came, and she asked one question of the people in the audience, and the Department of Education in particular. Where's the list of innovations that we can incorporate into public schools from 20 years' worth of charters? And everybody kind of looked around like, are you talking to us? Right? There was no answer. I mean, and to this day, I think that there are a lot of legislators who are strong advocates of charters, and there are a lot of legislators who aren't. And there's been proposals in the last 2 legislative sessions to redo the charter school law. And when we start to have these conversations and we bring up all these points, things start to fall apart because everybody realizes that it's a complicated issue. You want to have an opportunity to find out in some experimental way what's going to improve the outcomes of school students across the board. But you don't want public schools to pay for those experiments in a way that takes away from their chance to operate effectively. But you also expect that there are going to be some outcomes that they can apply to the public schools at large. And thus far, we've not really seen very much in that regard. So the verdict on charter schools is out. Sharon will talk about the mindset in Washington in a minute, but I think that's a good sidebar. Back to the issue of school aid, the discussion in Trenton now has to do largely with the fact that the school funding formula that we have is the first school funding formula in 30 years that the Supreme Court said was constitutional because it fairly looks at the characteristics of individual students and it looks at a district's ability to pay. The wealthier districts get less money, the poorer districts get more money. So the state's resources are allocated according to how wealthy or not wealthy districts are. And it's fair and it's appropriate and it's logical. It's a rational formula that works. The problem is the legislature hasn't funded it in 8 years. The cost to fully fund the current school aid formula is by a calculation I shared with the Education Law Center, about $1.5 billion higher than what the state has allocated. So there's some discussion now about reshuffling the school aid pot so that everybody gets the same amount and you don't have some districts who are getting more than 100% of what they're supposed to get and other districts getting a lot less. That discussion is crucial to a city like Camden because one of the key drivers of the formula is enrollment. If your enrollment is higher than it was 8 years ago, and they run the formula based on current characteristics, you're going to get more. If it's less, you're going to get a reduction. The last time I looked at the numbers, based on the demographics and the circumstances in Camden, you guys would probably lose about 0.5% of your aid. That's not horrible, but it's still a loss. There are a lot of legislators, and the association's position is that no district should ever get a reduction. The problem is the formula is underfunded by $1.5 billion. So discussions in Trenton about how they're going to fix this and how they're going to fairly allocate aid are going to be important to cities like Camden Because in an ideal world, you're not going to see a reduction. The likelihood that you're going to get a substantial increase in money is not that great, and that ties right back to the question of how you deal with even more charter schools. If you have more charter schools than other places, the percentage of your budget that's being siphoned off to cover the cost of charter school operations makes it more difficult to make your public schools efficient and effective and provide the adequate education that other districts are doing. I'll stop there. I'm sure there's other questions.
I have 2 questions. The first, you said before that charter school funding comes through the school district, and they receive about 90%.
The way the law is set up, if a district spends $10 on a student, $9 follows that student if they leave the district and go to a charter school.
So that 10% that the district gets to retain, is that just extra funding that it wouldn't otherwise?
Oh, it's money in recognition of the fact, like I said before, here we are in this room, you know, they're not heating or cooling just this part of the room. So a district, even though they lose students, still has to provide a baseline of support. And so they need a subset of that money. I'd argue they need all the money, but so that's the rationale between the 90 and 10 split.
So it's not just necessarily because the district is the chartering agency?
No. As a matter of fact, we've lobbied. There was a discussion about a year ago about changing the way charter schools are authorized. And we thought this was a great opportunity for us to jump in and say, why don't local districts decide whether charter's open or not? And they could partner with and run charter schools in a way that works with their budgets. Of course, the legislature didn't go for that, but that was our bright idea. In Texas, they do that, and it works very well. So local boards of education decide if they need a special school, they create a charter school, and it deals with a subset of the student population that needs some special treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the way we do it in New Jersey.
My second question was, would you say that the balloon cost of purple spending in Camden could be related to the fact that the weighted factors of our special education population?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
whereas the charters maybe have fewer, so we are actually seeing an increase in that population.
yeah, I mean, you take this baseline amount for an elementary school student, and it's called the regular education amount, and it's to provide an adequate education, not a superior education. And we can have a sidebar conversation about that. But you take that base amount. Right now, it's $11,000. And then you add weighting factors to that based on if the student lives in an at-risk household, eligible for free and reduced lunch, you add another $11,000, okay? Then there's a weighting factor based on how the student is classified. If the student has special learning needs, there's an amount that gets added. It's 14.9% right now. Then there are weights attached to English language learners, et cetera. So the sum total of that for that student equals to per pupil spending that student needs to get an adequate education. And then what the state does is look at how much a city like Camden can afford to spend based on that amount, and the difference between what you can raise locally is what the state provides. And that's the way the formula works. So it's, yes, ma'am.
So the $11,000 is the same for the public student and the charter school student, and then it's...
Well, the charter school student would be 90% of the $11,000. So almost, yeah.
And
Yes.
when they return, say, I know I work at the high school, so I see a lot of times the kids go to a charter school, and then November, they're back with us.
Right.
We get absolutely no money because we lost them to the charter school. So how does that constitute and we still provide the same amount of care, as you were saying, same amount of everything. So I'm thinking, why can't that money just be funneled back to the public school? Because, okay, y'all only had them for what, a month and a half? But y'all get to keep 90% of that money and we get the 10% and we have them for the remainder of the year. That makes absolutely no sense.
I agree. I mean, technically, there isn't a way to capture some of the money back. But, I mean, it depends on how the district provides the money to the charter school to begin with. You don't give them all the money at the beginning of the year, do you? So, arguably, there is some opportunity to get the money back, but, I mean, we can get into a discussion about accounting and so on. But yeah, you're right. Your point is well taken. Yes, sir.
I hear in the, I'm all over, and I hear in the guidance department, that's like one of the most frequent conversations that I come across when speaking about kids being funneled back from, the charter schools into our school. And it's like a really like a slap in the face is because, the parents want the kids to go there. They act up in the charter schools and they hold them until they obtain that money and then ship them back to us. That's what it seems like.
Well, and you're not wrong. I think we've had 8 years of an administration in Trenton that has been very supportive of charter schools and very resistant to having these kinds of conversations. The good news, to the extent that there's good news to report, is that this coming November, we have every 4 years we elect not just members of the General Assembly, but the state Senate and the governor. And the current governor can't run again. So the front runner is likely to be someone who will be much more sympathetic to the points you just made. And I suspect that in the next legislative session, which will start sometime in the middle of next January, we'll probably finally see some charter school reforms that, at the very least, address returning some of the money that got sent to a charter when the student comes back. I mean, that's just common sense. Yes, sir.
Enrollment in the actual public school, how is that affecting the actual budget of the public school? And why does the enrollment in the charter school affect that also?
Well, the way the formula works, going back to when Governor Florio created the Quality Education Act, the state changed fundamentally the way they provided aid to districts. Before that, the state provided money to towns based on how wealthy or not wealthy they were in terms of their assessed valuation. It was that simple. The wealthier towns got less, the poorer towns got more, but it was all about the assessed valuation. It didn't matter if you had 100 kids or 200 kids or 500 kids. It was about your property value. In 1991 or 1990, when they passed the Quality Education Act, they went to something called a foundation-based approach. And the foundation method was basically, you look at the kids. You look at how many kids you have in a district and what their characteristics are, and you determine what the district needs based on the number of kids. So enrollment matters. The more kids you have, the more money you're eligible for. The less kids you have, the less you're eligible for.
Is the enrollment for the charter school, is that separated from the public schools, or is it considered?
Well, I mean, technically speaking, they're all considered public school students. And the district is getting money for those kids, but they have to then turn it over to the charter school. So, yeah, I mean, they're part of the total overall enrollment, but the money gets carved out of the budget and sent to the charter school, so you don't get to control it. That's really the impact of charter schools.
So, I have a question too, in reference to like when we talk about the budget and even like the operations of school. Mm-hmm. It was mentioned by someone that basically a city like Camden is basically broken into 4 divisions, meaning that you have 4 different models of education. You have your school managing, you have your charter schools, you have your Renaissance, and then you have your public schools, right? So with that, it's like where and how do you account for tracking all these different things that we're talking about, especially when you're talking about budget, when, like we're saying, your operational budget, and how your school is run, you have 4 different models that you have to track and keep up with.
Yeah, the way the funding formula is set up isn't that sophisticated. They're not drilling down that far.
Right. But somewhere along the line, those are the kind of things that are falling through the crack when you're talking about really having adequate funding to educate the children.
I don't disagree. In fact, I've worked with this stuff for a long time, and in my opinion, you need to have sort of a regular education aid formula, and then you need to have another kind of a calculation that sits on top that addresses districts like Camden and others that have a wide disparity of circumstances. Some districts are simple. They get 1,000 kids. It's a middle-class district. They have X amount of money that they can provide. The rest comes from the state, and they don't have a whole lot of disparity. Other districts, you just have everything under the sun. I mean, every time you turn around, you have a new situation that's not addressed. And there needs to be a way to carve out resources that would go and assist those districts who don't ask for these situations, but they have to live with them. That would be the way I would work it. But then you have to find the money to make that work. Yes, sir.
My question is who approves how many charter schools is allowed inside of the district? And is there a cap on how many charter schools? And then the other thing is, why are there more charter schools in Camden than there is, for say, like in Morristown or in Cherry? Why does it seem like the inner cities are being targeted more, but it's being also allowed to be targeted more? Because it just doesn't make no sense.
I hear you, and I think
we're allowing them to take absolutely over. Because it was supposed to be a competition thing where they were supposed to be innovative and they were supposed to be creative, but it doesn't make any sense to me that if I was able to afford to send my child to Morristown Friends throughout his whole school life, his tuition would actually drop down to $18,000 once he goes to high school. If I sent him from kindergarten all the way to high school, once he hits those high school grades, those high school like 10, 11, 12, or 9, 10, 11, 12, the tuition actually drops from being a student to about $18,000. So how can they afford at $18,000 to give a child an excellent education, but we can't seem to mimic that or be able to do that at $24,000 each year of their life?
well,
And not even a charter school can do that also. So, but my original question was, who approves how many charter schools are in the city of Camden, and why are they allowing so many charter schools?
Okay. You asked about 6 questions, and I'll try and go through. Okay, the first one, it's straightforward. The Commissioner of Education. The process in New Jersey, if you want to open up a charter school, there's a certain amount of due diligence that's required in terms of making an application to the Department of Education and stipulating in the application, which is fairly lengthy and complicated, the reasons and the background for your proposal, and then the charter school section of the Department of Education reviews that application and makes a recommendation to the commissioner. Right now, I just read this in an article 2 days ago. There are 16 new charter schools pending statewide. I don't know if any of them are in Camden off the top of my head. 16 statewide. But in fairness to the department, they do close charter schools. I'm familiar with at least 3 in Trenton, where I'm from, that have closed over the last 6 or 7 years because they didn't meet the requirements. DOE does go in at least on every 4 or 5 years and evaluate their performance, and if they're subpar, they close them. Now that doesn't mean that's the general operating principle, but to your question about why there are so many more charters in urban areas than there are in suburban areas, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. I think that there are a subset of people, and I'm not sure what that subset is, who would say to you that there are a lot of people who live in a town like Camden or Newark or Trenton or Patterson who aren't satisfied with public schools. They believe that public schools aren't providing an adequate education for their kids, and they want an alternative. So they create a market for charter school operators to come in and say, we can do it better. In places like Morristown, you don't have the dissatisfaction. You don't have the residents saying, these schools are terrible. We got to fix this. Most of the people who live in a place like Morristown, which has one of the highest per capita incomes in the state, they're not satisfied. They send their kids to Morristown Friends or some private school because they have the money to do it. I mean, most of us don't have those resources. So I think that's a big part of the reason why you see charters concentrated in urban areas. There's an overarching sense, because people who don't know and don't pay attention believe that the public schools aren't yielding a product that is competitive with what private schools or a charter school can do. Okay, the statistics say otherwise.
Is there any way to petition or stop the charter schools from even being open, like, from government opening another one?
Well, yeah, there's a legislator from, I guess she's from South Orange, Maplewood, Myla Jacey, in the Assembly, who has had a bill in the last 2 sessions that would curtail any new charter schools until the state actually steps in and shows why we need more charter schools and what they're really producing.
They're looking at their accountability process.
Well, yeah. I mean, districts like Camden have, this thing that looks like a telephone book of regulations and accountability requirements that they have to submit to the state and to the auditors, et cetera, to justify their operations. The accountability rules and regulations for charter schools are much less. The idea initially being that you wanted to exclude a whole lot of regulatory oversight to give these schools an opportunity to excel and to do things. Well, 20 years in, we haven't seen that. In fact, one of the only studies that's been done nationally suggests that about 60% of the charter schools produce basically the same result that public schools do. Of the other 40%, 20% are better and 20% are worse. So on average, charter schools aren't really getting you anything different than what a public school education is going to get you.
Except the newer building.
Well, and draining your resources. Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll be here. I'll answer questions at the end, but I'll let Sharon talk about Betsy DeVos and the people in Washington.
Oh, okay. You know her. You know her. We ready to roll.
So next we want to bring up Ms. Sharon Seiler. She joined New Jersey School Board in October of 2004. Her career at New Jersey School Board Association began as a county program coordinator for the 7 southern counties in New Jersey. She joined the Governmental Relations Department in 2007 as a legislative coordinator. In 2013, she began a legislative advocate focusing on federal issues, health and wellness initiatives, and curriculum. She is the liaison to the National School Boards Association and is the legislative advocate representative for the New Jersey School Board's Urban School Boards group. Sharon holds a degree in General Studies and has attended Thomas Edison College for a bachelor's master's program in organizational leadership and communication. Sharon currently holds a seat on the ESSA stakeholders group from the New Jersey Department of Education and the New Jersey Statewide School Breakfast Expansion Committee, along with other New Jersey Education Association. So she's going to talk about the Every Student Succeed Act under the new federal administrative, under our new federal administration.
I'm going to fall. Good morning. Good morning. Mike is the numbers guy. So I'm more going to tell a story about what's going on federally and locally too. So I sit on the ESSA stakeholder group from the New Jersey Department of Education. And ESSA is the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the reauthorization that's going to be implemented in the next school year, which takes the place of No Child Left Behind and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I'm so happy to sit on this group because I sit with all the other education associations. We are networking like we've never networked before. We all don't agree with everything, but at least we get to discuss the initiatives and try to move forward as positively as possible. One of the biggest initiatives, which I think that Camden can relate to, is the process of the regional achievement centers. The initiative of, I see Martha looking. The initiative of ESSA is to target the low-performing schools. And I know that you've experienced Iraq in Camden City, and I don't think that you had a great relationship with the RAC itself. I remember talking to one person who ran the RAC, and then I never saw him again, and I don't even know who ran it after that. But what they are trying to do is improve the whole process. So what happened before was that the RAC would go into this specific school and only work with the school itself in order to target improvement. Now what they're going to do is deal with the whole district. And the plan actually will be implemented by the district. The district will present the plan to the New Jersey Department of Ed, and the New Jersey Department of Ed will approve the plan. So everybody will be working together. There will be more communication. You will know what's going on, as the Board of Education will. And also there has to be a lot more community engagement, which is what we're doing today, so that everybody is aware of the process. So we're all happy about that part of it. This law obviously was signed by President Obama, and now that we have a new administration, the plan is status quo. Everything is just keep going. But I think there's some concerns about what actually will be implemented moving forward in the Republican administration versus the Democratic administration. Betsy DeVos, as the new Secretary of Education, is a voucher supporter, voucher and charter school supporter, since we just had that big discussion. Martha and I sat in on a meeting from national school boards. I work with the lobbyists in the Governmental Relations Department and National School Boards. They're on the Hill in Washington all the time talking to Congress. And they have what they've proposed is, instead of knocking vouchers and charter, they're saying you're not looking at the public school programs that are offered. And you need to look at the specialized programs that public schools are offering and put some of that money towards that and not just vouchers and charters. So they're trying to do this in a psychological way of saying, we're okay if you want to do that, but you have to do this too. Not let's take that away, but let's add to it and try to support public schools just like we're going to support charter and vouchers. Betsy DeVos, her terminology of a public school, she calls them government schools. So it's a very different way of thinking, because her kids went to private school and she went to private school, and so it's just quite interesting the difference between the Obama administration and now the Trump administration. And he's very willing to put $20 million towards the voucher program in order to support it. So we'll have to just wait and see how that goes. As far as what's going on in New Jersey, another positive initiative with this whole plan is that the state will have more control. They will not be dealing so much with the U.S. Department of Ed. They will be making the decisions on what goes on in New Jersey without so much monitoring from the feds. So I should just say that with us working with them, we are giving a lot of input on what we think would work and wouldn't work. So some of the things, obviously PARC is still a test. It is still going to be the test. It's going to be used as your calculation of growth, how students are doing. From 3rd to 8th grade, each year they're still going to be giving a PARC test, and then one time in high school you have to take this test. One of the issues with this is that in their plan they have proposed that if a student doesn't take the test, they will get a 0. Okay, so there are a lot of students that, go ahead.
Question about the park.
Go ahead.
Because I hear so many different stories, and me just coming back to the education field. How would I say it? I was in the special education.
Okay, right.
Now I'm in the general education.
Yes.
It's quite different. So PARC is fairly new to me, even though my kids participate with taking it. But is it true that if a high schooler doesn't take PARC, that they don't get to graduate?
they don't get to graduate. They're going to, no, it hasn't been that way right as of now. There's alternative assessments that you can use. But if this plan goes through and everything gets approved, they'll get a 0 for not taking the test, which would bring down the proficiency of each student. But I think there'll still be alternative assessments in order to graduate.
The State Board of Education adopted a regulation last year which was pretty controversial. Beginning in 2021, which is 4 years from now, students will have to take the PARCC test as a graduation requirement. 4 years in Trenton in the State House is like 4,000.
It could change, yeah. Yeah.
It's probably going to change.
Yeah, I don't want to say that that's the automatic, because whether that happens or not, right now it's not. So, go ahead. Sure.
And it's in regards to the park. Another thing is, I was hearing, because these are all the questions that my students ask me, and I hate not knowing the
Go ahead.
answer to give them. In regards to the park, it was an opt-out form they
Yes.
take, so now they're saying that it's over.
There was never really an opt-out form from the Department of Education. The State Board of Ed has basically said there is no opt-out. You don't take the test, then you don't take the test. Right now, there's no penalty if you don't take the test, because some of these students are taking other tests that are giving them what they need for college or wherever they plan on going. But with the plan proposed, it's just saying you can opt out, but you'll get a 0. We're not happy about this. This is not something that we're supporting, but they feel like, see, this is what's happening. As part of the federal, they are saying you need to be 95% participants in the PARCC test. So in order for New Jersey to get their students to take it, they're going to say, look, students, just take it, because however you do, at least you won't get a 0. So that's really the message that's been sent. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, we can talk after. I can give you more information.
Okay. Another thing that they would like to initiate is something called chronic absenteeism, which is going to be used as sort of an indicator of how your school is doing. It's a measurement. We're also not real big supporters of this, but we are willing to keep this discussion going. A lot of the conversation was, what is the definition of chronic absenteeism? According to the Department of Ed, chronic absenteeism is if you are 10% or more absent in a year, then you're considered chronically absent. So if you're 18 days or more, then you have an issue. Now, if you're sick and you cannot go to school, but there's a plan in place for you to get your curriculum at home, then you're not considered absent. You're okay. But if you're somebody that, took a job and left, just decided to go to work and, popping into school when you feel like it, or you're just not going to school, or, you have to, there's a lot of things that could be an excused absence, and then there's things that are not excused. And so they're using that as an indicator. I'll be right with you. Basically because a lot of the other states are using it as an indicator, so I think it's holding the country in a way that everybody will use the same measurement. What did you want to ask me?
Well, I wanted to get clarity, because I was told that chronic absenteeism is measured if excused absences or unexcused absences total. So even if they're excused.
The Department of Ed, we had the same discussion, because everything seemed like it was unexcused, whether if you went to go visit a college, it was unexcused. If you were absolutely sick for 2 or 3 days and you came back with a doctor's note, it's unexcused. A lot of it also has to do with the fact if you're late. If you come in late and you miss first period, you're absent, because if they do attendance and you're not there, they don't change it once you come in. So there's a lot of different measurements that actually need to be tweaked in order to have what's called excused absences and non-excused absences. So if it's going to affect the culture and climate of the school, then there needs to be more monitoring of who's actually coming into school and who's not, and if it's excused or not excused. And that's what they're going to be working on. But they've had special conversations with us because they know that none of the education associations are in real support of this. They're trying to defend the reason why they're using that as an indicator. And, you know, we don't want to not work with them, so we're trying to really understand why it is that they've made that decision to use that as the extra indicator. Something that, you know, I kind of take personally is there's been a conversation with the Republican administration about free and reduced lunch students. And this is whether they should be fed or not at school if they're on free lunch. So who is he? He's the director of the Office of Management. I mean, I am just like livid about this. And he said, you know, I don't know that we need to feed these kids. And I have not heard that only federally. I have also heard it locally. You know, what are we, social services? Yes. Should we have before school programs and after school programs? Because if we didn't have them, then so much more money could go into school from 8 to 2, so we wouldn't have to cover these other programs. So I don't know that everybody has to be fed. And he comes up with some philosophy that says, children who don't get enough food at home must personally overcome all socioeconomic barriers to their success and get their grades up before they deserve to be fed at school. Well, maybe his name is Mulvaney. He is do you know who that?
He's the new director
of Office of Management. And I said, you know what? Maybe somebody shouldn't feed him and see how he likes his day. You know, I am a big proponent of breakfast after the bell, making sure that kids do get to eat either before or after school starts. And I know that a lot of your schools are giving out dinner before these kids go home, either through that 21st Century program. You're also dealing with the summer meals programs through the community. So that is like a big issue with me. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I have, unless you have questions to ask me.
I'm like just living right now.
I know. Okay, let's start from the back. Go ahead.
So, No Child Left Behind in the new program.
No, ESSA is
Basically the same thing.
it's a replacement for No Child Left Behind.
Is it the testing, because I understand that it takes to about 112 tests that a child basically goes through in one school year, which then takes
The park, this.
No, but there's several tests that they have to go through in order to prep for the parks. And then, so it takes away from the curriculum.
Well, are they teaching to the test? Yeah, Mike's going to come up and help me with this conversation.
Will it destroy the curriculum?
About assessment.
There has been conversation, obviously, about are you just in school to get taught to the test so that you get good scores and that reflects on the teacher's, evaluation and how their performance. It's not always that way. I don't want to say that that's absolute, but obviously there are probably certain schools that are teaching more to the test than other schools, okay? Because if you have high achieving students that you know are doing well, then you're probably not doing so much teaching to the test than another school would be.
Do he mean assessments? When he's saying tests, is he saying assessments
Yeah.
or he's talking about tests?
He means teaching to the standardized test, yes, to the assessment. Go ahead.
Jump in here. Sort of a history lesson, okay? Do you need me to be at the microphone or? Okay.
Here, can we do that?
No, we'll do this.
Okay.
So we'll go back to, I don't know, 1970, 1980. Ronald Reagan's the president. There's this national report done called The Nation at Risk. And the upshot of this report is that public schools are failing our kids. We're falling behind the rest of the civilized world in terms of how we rank in terms of student outcomes. So it's the beginning, it's the birth of the charter school movement. So fast forward to 2000, George Bush gets elected president. His wife is a former school teacher. They decide that it's time to reauthorize something called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was, a lot of people don't know this, which was really a part of a package of bills that was passed by Lyndon Johnson, education was considered a civil right. And the idea behind the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was to guarantee that there was at least some minimal federal oversight to make sure that all the schools and all the states were doing their due diligence to make sure that everybody was getting a fair shot at getting a good education. So George Bush comes in, and they do a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and they create No Child Left Behind. That's what they called the reauthorization. So No Child Left Behind addresses what was reported 20 years previously, that the percentage of performance of kids in U.S. schools was falling way behind kids in Asia and kids in Europe. So they created this rigorous set of standards that was going to guarantee that all public school kids were going to perform at a certain level, and if they didn't, the federal government was going to dramatically reduce the aid provided to those states and those school systems. So they created such a rigorous formula for compliance that by 2014, 85% of the schools, not the districts, but the schools in the country would have been considered not meeting average yearly progress. And so everybody agreed that they overstepped their bounds with No Child Left Behind. But locally, I mean, a state like New Jersey, districts are all competing with each other for state funding, and superintendents want to keep their jobs. They created a battery of tests that they were giving kids to say that we had schools in New Jersey that were blue ribbon schools in terms of the State Department of Education that weren't meeting average yearly progress. So they were failing as far as the feds were concerned, but the best schools in the state as far as the state standards were concerned. So superintendents and other education groups, but superintendents in particular, started to apply a series of tests to kids so that they could independently verify that their kids were doing well. So you had the use of tests for a variety of reasons, less about making sure the kids were learning, but about proving to everybody that your tax dollars were being well spent. So there was a lot of consternation about No Child Left Behind. Barack Obama comes in, he brings in this guy Arnie Duncan from Chicago. They decide to create an opportunity for states to apply for waivers to opt out of No Child Left Behind and compete for block grants to do other things. But one of the things that they started to do, in 2008, there was a group called the Council of Chief State School Officers, basically the commissioners of education for all 50 states. And they decided that it was time for all the states to have a set of common standards. So if you were learning calculus in Iowa, you were learning the same calculus in New Jersey. Might not be using the same book, but you were learning the same things. So they created the Common Core standards. And an outgrowth of the Chief State School Officers discussion was a methodology to assess how well students across the country were doing with respect to learning the Common Core standards. New Jersey was one of a large number of states. Originally it was 38 states, now it's down to like maybe 11 or 12, who decided to use the PARCC test, which was an independent test that was going to be designed to figure out how well or not well kids were doing, but most importantly, to drill down with the data that was provided on the test to find out if kids weren't doing well, where aren't they doing well, and let's fix our curriculum so that we can make sure kids are doing good. The State Board of Education adopted the Common Core State Standards in 2009. The curriculum, the standards, what you have to learn, the state sets, the curriculum, how you teach to those standards, is approved by every local Board of Education. So notwithstanding what they do in other states, in New Jersey, local boards, there was still a lot of local control. And the PARCC test was perceived by a lot of people in the education environment because it was a rigorous test that was going to guarantee that kids were actually learning something. They decided, we don't like this. Then when the state decided they were going to use the outcomes of the PARCC test as a part of the teacher evaluation scheme, that was it. That was war, because the union said, wait a minute, you're going to use a brand new test that we're not even familiar with, and you're going to evaluate us and our performance. So the whole thing sort of fell apart. The Park test, and I'm not trying to defend it, but it was designed to be an objective test, not picked by somebody in a district because they knew their kids were going to do well on it so they could look good to everybody, but to make sure the kids were actually learning, because the competitive world that we're in, I mean, my son works over here at Campbell Soup. He's in the IT department. There's 40 people. 19 of them are here, and the rest are in Mumbai, because that's where the people with the expertise to do what they're doing. They're doing the financial stuff for Wall Street. It's a really intense work environment. Almost all the people he works with are Indian, not because that's what they want to hire, but because they're the people who can do the work. So Bill Gates and other people said, wait a minute, we got to fix this. We got to get American people getting these jobs, but if they can't compete, why can't they compete? Let's come up with a set of standards, and let's come up with a test that measures those standards so we can make sure our kids are learning what they need to learn. It's really that simple. In lieu of that, the schools were supposed to stop all these other tests. But everybody knew the Park test wasn't going to yield the kind of information that was publicly satisfying, so they said, let's do it at the Park test, and let us keep the test that we're using now that may only measure an 8th grade performance for a high school graduate, but that's okay because it makes us look good. I'd make the argument that, I was thinking about this when Sharon was talking. I went to college in East Orange, and I used to play ball in the gym. I was never good enough to be competitive on any kind of college team, but there were guys from the Rucker League in Harlem who came to East Orange and played. And I used to get in pickup games. And an extra guy, I got beat up, but I played with guys who were going to play in the NBA because I was going to get better. And the only way I was going to get better was to play with the best guys. Well, the only way you're going to get better is to be held to a rigorous set of standards. So instead of being afraid of the Park test, people should be diving into and saying, what's it telling us? And now how do we work with our teachers to fix this so that our kids get the jobs at Campbell Soup, right? I mean, that's the goal here. And nobody's ever really, in my opinion, articulated it in that way. So we cut through all the contentious discussion about what it means for employees. Let's talk about how we're going to help the kids to be the best they can be. And that's really what this is all about. And so when you get to the bottom of it, if there's a better test than that, then let's use that. Yeah. I'm not wedded to the Park test, but we want to make sure that kids are going to, I mean, my father told me, you got to be better than I was. You've got to advance. That's the point. And so I want my kids and my grandkids to be better than me. So I want them to be exposed to the best possible education. And I want the public schools to be the best possible education because that's where everybody's going. Kind of that simple.
Explain that, because that's a way that we can present that to our students.
Right.
That's not being told to them in that way. It's like you
Have to take it. I don't,
and that's final.
you all have kids that are taking the test?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know about you, but I always wanted to know how, especially one of my son who had more trouble in school than my other one, how he was doing. So I really encouraged these tests and wanted to see the scores to see
it's
that.
not supposed to show that everybody's bad. It's
It's
supposed
just to show your growth.
where you need to improve.
Right.
And let's talk to the school board about designing a curriculum with the superintendent that targets the places where we need to do better.
My challenge is with teachers.
Well,
I think
Well-
when you stand up in the front of that class, you're to give them the best you've got and get the best from them.
That's right.
I want you to do, bring me your best. Don't bring me your worst.
That's right.
Bring me your best. And if you give me your best, we're going to succeed all of the way.
That's exactly right, and that's what it's all about. Yes.
And that's what I teach my parents.
Right. Who's got? Oh, go ahead.
So I agree. I totally agree, actually. You know, I have 4 children all in school, and we're a strong foundation. We don't believe in mediocrity. We excel to the fullest. But my frustration comes in when my kids come home and they're extremely exhausted from all of the testing. And
The way the scheduling. Yeah.
to want to do the testing.
right.
When do we say enough is enough? Like how much testing do they have to go through before they just don't want to do it anymore and they don't want to
shut
do their
down.
best?
Well, here's
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
here's the dilemma.
12 years of age, they should not.
They have to. They're squeezing it all in. Yes.
It used to be that, and this is the sea change that's going on, and it's gonna make its way through public schools one way or another. But it used to be that you were learning things, and how smart or not smart you were was measured by how much you could recall that you learned. And that's fine. You know, you learn to count, you learn the times table, you learn that Los Angeles is on the other side of the country from New York and that kind of stuff. And maybe you remember a lot of it, maybe you don't. But the whole point of the evolution in public education is not so much about what you've learned, but how you can use it. And the PARC test represents a challenge to students and to teachers because it fundamentally changes the way you teach to the point where a lot of kids can do really good when it comes to, 2 times 2 is 4.
It's memory.
But
Yeah.
no, it's not the memory. It's, okay, Johnny's got to go 2 miles down Route 130,
Well, yeah.
and gas costs 40 cents, and he's got 80 cents, and the gas tank is empty. And you got to start to associate real-life situations with what you've learned. And that's what the PARC test is starting to measure, and so it's harder. Because the idea is, you can learn a lot of stuff, but okay, can you use it in the real world? And ultimately, if we're going to help our kids, we're going to help them to stand on their own 2 feet when we're not here and excel in the world. And so we're trying to remake the educational environment one that does that. And it's hard. And it's not just hard on the kids, it's hard on the teachers who have been for 20 or 30 years teaching to generate a base of knowledge with the expectation that the kids are going to practically, somewhere on their own, connect the dots and make it work out there in the real world. And that's a hard proposition. And I have a lot of sympathy for teachers who are being thrown into the mix and saying, wait a minute, you're telling me I learned to teach in a certain way, I've been doing it for 20 years, and now suddenly, we're changing gears on it. And this is an evolutionary process. It's going to take some time.
I think that what he's saying is that even students have been in the habit of, especially students from young to high school now, have been in the habit of, I'm studying for a test, I memorize or whatever it is, but now I have to show my work and I have to show the process, that I understand how the whole process works, and that has to be shown when they look at the test.
I agree with that, but as far as strategically thinking and critically thinking,
Sure.
you have to be able to come
Yes.
up with solutions in different ways.
Right.
I'm totally for that, but I think back to my original
Yes,
question, why so many different types of tests? So from now until the end of the school year, they'll be testing.
Okay.
So when will we kind of be able to eliminate something or provide it so that way it's just not straight through? That's just a lot. Me as an adult, I don't know that I could do it. I don't know that I would want to wake up and be ready to go to school the next day.
Right.
I mean, I think the issue here is really, based on what I just said,
Evolutionary.
how do you look at lesson plans that teachers have where you're going to do the next chapter in the math book and then you're going to do the quiz and overlay that with, okay, in the middle of this, now you're doing a PARC test for a week. And so the teaching methodology that teachers are familiar with doesn't build in the whole PARC scheme. And I don't think anybody, in terms of implementation, has ever thought about, all right, we want to drill down and we want to find out more specifically where we need to focus on, but they didn't ask the teachers. They didn't say, if you were going to use this new test, how would you build it into your lesson plans? And that's really the dialogues and the discussions that have to be held, I think.
We have one more question.
The question, my question, you talked about the RAC.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does, because the issue in our district, Camden, is that, like you saying, RAC started off, RAC was helping the schools do the improvement plans.
Yes, that's right.
Which is one of the requirements.
Right.
So the fact that you're saying that RACs are going to be more involved in the upcoming.
I would say more communicative.
Okay, more communicative.
Yes.
How does RAC work, or how does RAC work in a state-controlled school district?
Actually, I'm not sure how that works, but what I can say to you is that the Department of Ed is completely aware that the way the RACs have been running has not worked, okay, in all the different districts that they've been involved in. So they are trying to open up the lines of communication between the district and the regional achievement centers to make it so that everybody is aware of what needs to be done in that particular school within the district, not just the school itself. Because I think what was happening is the RAC was working just with the principal and trying to institute an improvement plan. So now, and I'm not saying this is a perfect situation, but it's actually putting more responsibility on the district to come up with the plan that they think is adequate for that particular school, and saying, Department of Ed, are you okay with that plan? If you're okay, then okay, we'll use it. But now the district's going to come up with the plan, not the RAC.
So with the Every Student Succeed Act, how does that, is that language that's still in that actually makes schools, rather they're public schools, charter schools,
Doesn't
do
matter.
improvement plans, and who's responsible for that? Usually
Who
it would
determines?
come through the state doing
It's still-
the
It's still going to be the
assessment,
state.
and then-
Yeah,
and
they're
then-
going to determine what the low is 5%. There's two different categories.
Schools, or they're still doing
Yeah.
priority
Something like
schools?
that.
Yeah, comprehensive are Title I schools, okay? And then what's targeted are schools that are not Title I, but that have a subgroup that might need improvement. So they'll be worked differently. But the Title I will basically be the same thing where there's a plan, but it's coming now from your district, not from the RAC itself. Because the RAC, the district knows the school. The district knows what's going on in the school. So it's better that it does come from them. But it's just more work for them now to submit it to the Department of Ed for them to approve it. And then the RAC and the district will work together.
Yeah, we kind of went over our time by.
I think by a lot.
By quite a bit.
The thing is, this is one of those subject matters that we could talk all day and give you the opportunity. I would like to thank Mr. Michael Vernick and Ms. Sharon Seiler, because this is something, they go into Washington, and I've been blessed enough to be a part of the team that we go into Washington, and right now we talk to Corey and Melendez and Norcross.
Tell them that Congressman Norcross has been a big supporter for us. He hosts a breakfast when we go down there for all the congressional leadership to come and meet with us in the morning when we have our day on the Hill. And then we do have a private session with the two staff members from the Senate offices, from Menendez and Booker. And a lot of the conversation that we had this year actually had to do with costs for special ed, and how New Jersey is so noted for their special education programs, and how there's just not enough IDEA funding to support those programs, and that the districts are, being hurt because they're trying to run their school district and support these programs as well.
And early childhood as well. We've, even with the nutritional program, as Sharon said, it goes back, I think it was 2009 that we went and spoke to national school boards on behalf of, so we advocate, we are the arm and the voice for you. New Jersey School Board goes to the State Department and they advocate on behalf of our school districts, something that we did through Title I, and this is the difference. And we have the family and community school coordinators, your FOCs, some of you were community school coordinators in the past, which was a part of the grant for No Child Left Behind. Now we're under ESSA, so some of the things have changed, but the Title I portion has not changed. We still need you to be a part of it. If we say that the budget is not going to, looks like it's going to be what we need for our students, then what we used to do along with our community school coordinators, well, we would go to Trenton and we would rally, or we'll go to Washington and rally. They don't know what we need if we don't let them know. And they're already in the State House doing that on our behalf. There are meetings that take place with the Education Committee in Trenton that we should be going up to listen to what they're saying. You need to have that experience and understand how bills are put into place and legislation is passed on our behalf. So the things that we're talking about, we had before Paymon became in and became our superintendent, we had gone through, this school district had done a superintendent search and was about to appoint someone when the governor appointed Paymon Rahanover. So what that did was stopped us where we were, because we had already done a district in need of improvement. It was called DINI, D-I-N-I, District in Need of Improvement. We got the stats, the data to tell us what this school district needed. Then we did the CINI, which was the School in Need of Improvement, which told us what each individual school needed. Well, with that, that meant that the principal in that individual school knew exactly what their students needed. So therefore, you, the parents, and the coordinators at that table, when they do their monthly meetings, and you talk about what it is that you want to see happen for the children in the school district, but basically in your particular school, because every school is different. That's what that Title I money is in that school for you to say to them, this is the areas that we want to work with you to make sure that we put the programs in place that our students need to make sure it happens. You are critical, because if that money sits in that school and the county sees that the money is not disappearing on behalf of our children, and the state sees it's not disappearing on behalf of our children, one, we don't need you as someone to be employed because the job's not getting done and students aren't getting what they need. So it is crucial. This is April. We've got May and June. I can guarantee you that there's plenty of money that's sitting in your Title I account in every school in this district. And once again, they're going to say, what is it that we are doing and why aren't we doing it? Because we know that we have needs for our students in this district. We cannot afford to lose the money. So I want to say thank you to each of you who have come out here today. I hope that you will share. I hope that you will share the information that you have gotten. You need to turnkey this information in your school. There's a whole nother area that we haven't gotten to that even talks about our Perkins grant and the funding that deals with our CTE. So maybe we can invite them and have them come back at another time, or we can go up to where they are. You know what I'm saying? So, but those are the things that should be happening. The school board should be hearing this stuff. I'm functioning in it. I'm in the midst of it. Where's the rest of our board members? Where are the people who have to speak out on behalf of? I carry a weight, but I can't carry it all because I'm one voice. This is where it's important for all of us. And in order for us to happen, this to happen, I can't secure your jobs as a FOC. As a community school coordinator, I fought for it for years, and you had it. Now that you're FOC, that doesn't fall under the Title I dollars. I don't have a voice for you with that anymore. So I'm saying to you, the most important thing that we have here is our children. That's the one thing that we all agree on. You have a second page that we have given you. I will ask that before you leave, that you would turn that into us. It's an evaluation form, and I will keep in touch with you. Next month, our next District Parent Advisory Council meeting will take place May the 11th. May the 11th. That's our next DPAC meeting. But I'm saying to you that we do have trainings that take place the second Wednesday of every month. And this is the type of information that you get at those trainings, because that's information that comes back either from the state or the federal level, that either I'm in a meeting with them on a legislative committee or an urban school board meeting every month. So you want the information, it's here to be available for you. Thank each and every one of you. I want to thank Dr. Davida Coe-Brockington for allowing us to use the facility. And I also want to thank Ms. Watson for being here and taking care of things for us, and Ms. Grimmy. And also I want to mention to you that you know that one of our community school coordinators, Ms. Darby, has passed, and her funeral is going to be this Saturday at First Refuge Church on Park Boulevard and Kane Avenue. Services will start at 11. If you want to view the body, come in before 11 o'clock. All right. At this time, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who have come out to be here for this program, and God bless to each and every one of you. Thank you to CCSD-TV as well. Bye-bye.